WAMT. Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live. We are here live every Wednesday night this month at 7 o'clock. Tonight, mayoral hopeful Fernando Ferrer, the Downing Street memos, Smoke and Gun or Smoke and Mirrors, and the Contagious Media Project, a contest for web designers to get the most links to their site in 3 weeks. We'll show you the winning websites. But up first is Freddie Ferrer, the former Bronx Borough president and front-runner in the Democratic mayoral campaign since the campaign began. Let's see some of what he stands for. Freddie Ferrer, welcome to Brian Lehrer Live.
It's good to be with you on TV, Brian.
And let me start with something in the news today. Reading from the New York One news page, crime in city schools is down by almost 40%. And the mayor and the school's chancellor are taking credit for an operation that they've had with the NYPD in the schools. Have they done well?
Well, you know that the NYPD in the schools did not begin with Mike Bloomberg. It began with Rudy Giuliani, as you know. But it accelerated under Mike Bloomberg because when he and Joel Klein reorganized the Department of Education, they reorganized out the way you get disruptive kids out of schools. That touched off one of the most complex and one of the ugliest crime incidents in our public schools. So I'm glad crime is coming down. But then why is it, Brian, that I hear so many young people talk about disruptive kids in their schools, weapons detectors in their schools, the fact that they can't learn? We still have a long way to go.
What did you mean by they organized out the method of getting disruptive kids out of the schools?
Well, when they reorganized the Department of Education, they took out the process. They just apparently had no understanding of it. They took out the process that had teachers report to principals, principals report to district personnel, so that they could move disruptive kids out of a classroom setting, out of a school, and put them somewhere else.
Now, you got actually not you indirectly got criticized by the New York Post editorial page, not a surprise, but the think tank that you were affiliated with, the Drum Major Institute, it says, the DMI, which Ferrer headed until this year, is poo-pooing one of the most powerful public policy lessons ever, that getting serious with criminals, maintaining zero tolerance, and arresting lawbreakers for relatively small offenses leads to huge dips in crime. Just as cops flooded high-crime neighborhoods through Operation Impact, Mayor Mike and school security staff have sent extra police to 22 impact schools known for violence. But DMI, the think tank that you headed until you started running for office, said the city has chosen to respond to headline-grabbing visible symptoms of school disorder rather than treating the root causes. In other words, I don't like flooding the schools with cops. Are you on the same page with your old think tank?
Actually, Brian, I left the Institute December 31st, and I haven't read that report. I trust it's a good report. I like the people who are running the Institute, but I haven't read it. And I'm not going to comment. I can't comment on anything I haven't read. I mean, I've given you my comment on Mike Bloomberg's halting efforts in school security.
In 2001, when you were running for mayor, you said, quote, in the other New York, law-abiding people of color approach their police with fear rather than trust. Now, of course, that was the end of the Giuliani era. Do you think that's still the case today under Michael Bloomberg and Ray Kelly?
Well, Brian, I've always been a proponent of and an active participant when I was borough president for nearly 15 years in the Bronx and a council member for 5 years, in bringing police and community into closer cooperation with each other, closer trusting relationships. That was what that was about, trying to breach those gaps of trust and of confidence between communities and police. Yeah, to a very large extent, the dangerous and divisive policing policies that were authored in the administration of Rudy Giuliani, and especially under Police Commissioner Howard Safir, have abated. But there are still ways to go. to try to improve that police and community working together, which I think at the end finally does break the back of crime.
When a few weeks ago we had the Cooper Union history professor and relatively conservative commentator in New York terms, Fred Siegel, here talking about his new book, very laudatory about Mayor Giuliani and his effect on the city. And Siegel said that something that you have said in the past would come back to haunt you during this campaign, and that was that you had opposed the broken windows approach to policing, the Giuliani-Bratton approach that said if you go after petty crimes like turnstile jumping and things like that, it's going to have an effect on violent crime.
Did Fred Siegel actually say, in those exact words, I oppose the broken windows approach?
I believe he said that in past campaigns you have said. What was your position? What is your position?
Well, actually, Fred Siegel makes up a lot of things. I never opposed the broken windows theory, going after petty crime. I opposed the dangerous and divisive policing strategies of the Giuliani administration that gave rise to some of the most awful incidents in this city. I stand by that.
One thing the mayor has definitely done not so well at is relations with the city's labor unions. Police don't have a contract, firefighters don't have a contract, teachers don't have a contract long term. Could you do better?
You know, daycare workers didn't have a contract for nearly 4 years. Now, obviously, their bills don't wait for 4 years. Cops and firefighters and teachers need to support their families as well. Their bills don't wait for 2 to 3 years. And I think it's fair to say that while Mike Bloomberg has been spending an inordinate amount of time, the mayor's time, in pursuit of Olympic stadiums and where the javelin throw will be held, he hasn't spent that amount of time in negotiating contracts with some of the most important city workers who mean an awful lot to the life of New Yorkers. So, for example, when over 3,600 teachers leave the system, many of whom leave for higher-paying suburban school systems, when cops leave, by the way, before 20 years, 10 and 15 years, where many of them go to higher-paying suburban jurisdictions. We have to be very concerned about that.
I heard a stat today that among cities in the United States, the NYPD officers are number 153 in pay. I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but do they deserve a particular amount of pay raise, in your opinion?
Look, I don't know about the particular amount. Do they deserve a pay raise? You bet. Do firefighters deserve a pay raise? You bet. The teachers deserve a pay raise.
The mayor would say the same thing.
You
it's
bet.
a question of how much.
Well, you know, the thing is, money was no object when the mayor was talking about a Jet Stadium on the west side of Manhattan that nobody wanted and nobody asked for. Money was no object for that. But when we're talking about teachers and firefighters and cops, suddenly money is an object. Isn't that odd?
In 2001, you proposed a 30% pay increase for teachers in exchange for them working the month of July. Are you bringing that proposal back for this campaign?
No, I think times change and conditions change. I think teachers are willing. Teachers Union certainly has expressed willingness to go to a simple contract procedure in 100 schools. Now, the mayor and the chancellor rejected that offer out of hand. I would have taken it up in a heartbeat and started one of the most important innovations and experiments in improving public schools in this city that we have seen for decades.
What changed that is not a relevant offer right now? That much of an increase, or the idea of working an 11th month?
Well, among other things, Brian, what changed was the first teacher contract that Mike Bloomberg negotiated.
It had a big raise.
22%. That changed. Now, do they still need a raise? Absolutely. The other thing that changed was the UFT's offer to go to a simple contract in 100 schools. Let's start that experiment right now. Let's pick the 100 schools. And then next year, let's go to 200 schools. The year after that, let's go to 500 schools. Until we get them all, until we measure success, figure out how this thing works, and improve every school.
Also in 2001, on education, you proposed extending the city's income tax surcharge, which was set to expire at that time on the highest earners, to use the money to create after-school programs in all the middle schools. Are you bringing that one back for this campaign?
4 pennies a day. That's what it would have cost the average family in this city. And that was a tax cut that was put in place, a de minimis tax cut, frankly, that was put in place by Rudy Giuliani. By today's standards, when we talk about record increases in property taxes and sales taxes, I look like a piker. However, the aim is important, and that's why I proposed a way how to get the $23 billion down in the Campaign for Fiscal Equity decision. Not only to do after-school programs, which all of our schools desperately need, but pre-K programs, music and art programs, science and athletics programs, the kinds of things that building new school buildings and modernizing old ones, those are exactly the things that suburban school systems give their kids and that we are not giving ours.
So let me understand. You're saying that you're still proposing to extend the income tax surcharge. This is on earners over $500,000 a year, as I understand.
No, I didn't propose that. In fact, if you remember my proposal, Brian, it was to cancel the expiration of an income tax surcharge at 1.5 points. That was not what you're talking about.
So now this particular income tax surcharge is set to expire, and Gifford Miller, running against you in the primary, has proposed extending that and dedicating the money to reducing class size. So do you want to extend it and use it for other things, or how do you react to his proposal?
Well, Brian, I proposed a school investment plan that would ask pennies from Wall Street to give our kids an opportunity to get not only more teachers in a classroom, but if we don't build more physical space, all we're doing is, as you know, statistically reducing class size. 42 kids in a classroom with 2 teachers is still 42 kids in a classroom. We've got to build new school buildings, modernize old ones. That takes an enormous amount of money. But the Campaign for Fiscal Equity decision prescribed $9 billion for it, to do the kinds of things we should be doing in our classrooms, to improve the quality of teaching and learning, to improve the programs we offer, to extend the day for after-school programs and for pre-K programs. Well, Brian, that'll cost $14 billion. I proposed a way how to get a city's share of that so that we remove every excuse from Albany and put their feet to the fire to come up with the other $19 billion, so we give our New York City school kids, all 1.1 million of them, what every suburban school system gives their kids.
You referred to your proposal for a stock transfer tax, to restore a tax on stock transfers that was once there, correct?
At 1/10 the rate of what it used to be.
Okay. And some of your opponents in the Democratic primary, like Anthony Weiner, have criticized that, and they said, look, in an era when we're trying to redevelop Lower Manhattan after the 9/11 attacks, and when Wall Street firms can set up offices wherever they want in the computer era, that's an invitation for them to walk away from New York City to someplace where they won't be subject to that tax. Why not?
A couple of quick points. One, if we don't give all of our 1.1 million school kids all the tools they need to compete in this economy, to compose a paragraph in standard English, to compute and to reason, more jobs will leave this city. So I argue just the opposite. But second, and more importantly, this is an industry that paid in executive bonuses $15.8 billion at the end of last year. Surely a couple of pennies to give us the ability to invest in all of our school kids and the economic future of this city is the wisest investment possible. And third, Brian, and most importantly, I've put forward a plan on the table to come up with the city's portion of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity decision. I challenge anyone else to do exactly the same. Not half-step, not talk around it. Put a plan on the table that gets it down. Because, Brian, as you know, and the mayor has tried this, a strategy that says, I will put nothing on the table, and if I have to pay for it, then no thanks to $23 billion, is a strategy to get zero. And we know it, and we have seen it, because while the mayor jets off to Germany or to Africa in search of the Olympics, Albany is only 150 miles from here, and he has yet to do the fighting for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity decision to enrich the education of all of our kids.
All right. Everybody's talking about stadiums and Olympics, so let's talk a little bit about stadiums and Olympics.
Why not?
I read in the Daily News today that you won't commit to supporting the idea of the Olympics for New York City. Is that accurate?
No, it's not. In the course of the debate at the Association of Builders and Owners, what I said was, what city wouldn't be proud to have the Olympics? Sure. That's not the point, however. The point is the organizer of the Olympics, specifically Dan Doctoroff, before he became mayor, and I was borough president of the Bronx, came into my office, and in answer to the question that I asked him then, what will it cost the taxpayers of this city? He said, not a dime. Well, so far, Brian, we're seeing hundreds of millions of dollars of dimes piling up on the sides here while people are talking about the Olympics. Now, look, I'm in favor of the Olympics. Let's be very specific about it. I'm in favor of this city hosting the Olympics.
Are you not confident that it will be a net plus economically for the city?
I am not confident in the original assurances of the organizers of the Olympic Games, one of whom happens now to be the deputy mayor for development in this city, who said it won't cost the taxpayers a dime. That's palpably inaccurate. I use the term inaccurate loosely.
So it's worth
How about untrue?
It's worth, then you think it will cost the taxpayers a dime?
No, I know it will. It's been reported.
Is it worth it?
Well, they have yet to make the case that it is worth it. We have yet to see full transparency on what this will cost. We have yet to see full transparency on what a 2-week event will give the city.
And you don't have an opinion one way or the other as to what that might be and whether it's worth it?
Well, you know, Brian, everybody has an opinion. In a city of 8 million, we all do.
You're running for mayor.
Yes, I like to base my opinions on evidence, and we have seen no evidence. I think it's useful, in fact, for public debate to base our opinions on evidence.
You were an opponent of the West Side Stadium. Do you support the Ratner Stadium and towers at the Atlantic Yard site in Brooklyn?
The towers I do support. It's a very, very powerful agreement with the city and with the Ratner organization.
Because of the affordable housing component?
50% affordable housing. Look, you can't say you believe in affordable housing and reject that. However, I still hold that we shouldn't be using public dollars for private stadiums. And we certainly should be getting the maximum value for the development rights over the Atlantic Yards.
You know that it's precisely the towers that the residents of that area who oppose the plan oppose the most, because they say it would add so much density, both in office space and housing, to the neighborhood. What do you say to them?
I've talked to a great many of the people over there, and I think what they're opposed to is the lack of transparency in dealing here. Neither the city nor anyone else seems to want to come forward with the full facts on this. And I think people in that neighborhood, in any neighborhood, deserve to know all the facts, all the consequences, and all the impacts. It is their neighborhood and city, after all, Brian.
Little politics before you go. In today's New York Times Metro section, there's an article about Mayor Bloomberg wooing big Democratic Party donors. Not for their money, which he doesn't need, but for their public support and to get them to withhold money from people like you. And sure enough, he's got a few big fish. Stephen Ratner, this is a different Ratner, whose wife is finance chair of the Democratic National Committee, came out for the mayor. Laura Ross, finance chair of the John Edwards campaign last year, said she's for the mayor. Why don't you have their support?
Well, you know, Brian, I find it odd that these extraordinarily generous Democratic donors have apparently overlooked the fact that this mayor has generously funded some of the most conservative, right-wing, reactionary Republicans whose policies have hurt women, have hurt this city, have hurt public education. He's going to have to explain it to them, I suppose.
But meanwhile, he apparently has explained it to them to their sattesfaction.
I don't know that, but of course I think other people ought to be asking all of them. I can't speak for them. Other people ought to be asking, why is it, do you think it's right to support a mayor whose deep financial pockets have supported the congressional campaigns of some of the most retrograde Republicans this nation has ever seen? Can
you tar Mayor Bloomberg with the Bush brush? You know, last week we had the two Republicans running against Mayor Bloomberg in the Republican primary, Agnebenny and Shaw. Yeah. And Tom Agnebenny said, this mayor said he'd consider endorsing Hillary Clinton. What kind of a Republican is he?
Oh, Brian, come on. He gave a $7.5 million check to the Republican National Convention. He has generously supported the state Republican Party, and George Pataki generously supported Senate Republicans in his state, and even more fundamentally, congressional Republicans on the federal level. He's not a Republican? Who are you kidding?
Today's Quinnipiac poll has the mayor at his highest approval rating in 3 years, 55%, and just after his biggest defeat on the West Side Stadium, and he's beating you 50-37 in a head-to-head matchup. How do you explain, or how do you come to grips with him going up just after this defeat?
Well, you know, Brian, the fortunate thing is I'm running for mayor, and I'm trying to build a city that works better for every New Yorker. I'll let the analysts try to analyze all of that. For me, my priority is building excellent schools in every neighborhood, affordable housing in every community, access to health care that won't be a barrier for people to get the kind of decent health care they need for themselves and for their kids, and good jobs, not selling beer and Cracker Jacks in some stadium, but the kinds of jobs that give people the ability to support themselves and feed their kids.
And on campaign spending, the mayor has so much money that he's now in, I think, his third round of highly produced television commercials. He's going after you over your relationship with your old think tank and relatively small amounts of money. How overwhelming is his money as a presence in this race, and how do you fight it?
You know, the interesting thing, Brian, is in 2001, he spent $74 million to get himself elected, and he explained to reporters like you that he needed to do that because he needed to get New Yorkers to know him a little better. He's on track for spending tens of millions of dollars more than that in 2005 in an apparent effort to get New Yorkers to forget who he has been for the last 3.5 years. Look, in the last few weeks, he has spent what an average family in New York would take roughly 130 years to earn. When you put it in that context, I don't think all the money in the world will fool New Yorkers about Mike Bloomberg.
Freddie Ferrer, leading candidate on the Democratic side for mayor. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Brian.
And still to come, the Downing Street memos, smoke and mirrors, or an Iraq war smoking gun. But first, the Contagious Media Project, a contest for web designers to get the most links to their site in 3 weeks. We'll show you the winning websites. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Protect yourself from mannequinism. Volunteer. Vote. Stay informed. It's easy to get involved.
Prominent professors, outstanding students, illustrious alumni, all on the Emmy-nominated magazine show about CUNY. Hi, I'm Valerie Vasquez. Join us every week as we bring you stories about the people and programs that make CUNY a place where you study with the best.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We are here live every Wednesday night during the month of June at 7 o'clock. And now the Contagious Media Project, a contest for web designers to get the most links to their site in 3 weeks. to win a cash prize. We will show you the winning websites. They may surprise you or they may not. And we'll talk about what the experiment was all about. With me is the creator of the Contagious Media Project, Jonah Peretti, Research and Development Director of a creative art and media center called iBeam, based in Chelsea. Hi, Jonah. Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live.
Thanks for having me.
What is the Contagious Media Project?
The Contagious Media Project was an open competition for artists, designers, hackers, anyone who makes creative media for the web, where they got access to our server where they could upload their project, and then we just saw over a 3-week period who got the most traffic and attention to their project.
So I want to show the homepage of this website, and you will see on here that it says Contagious Media Showdown. Prizes, $2,000 grand prize. And so you've got a Wild West feel here, right?
Yeah, we had the idea of the project is to try to understand contagious media. And what contagious media is, it's when you start something really small, you tell a few people, and then just through word of mouth, it ends up reaching a much larger audience. And so the Contagious Media Showdown site actually had to be a little contagious itself because we needed people to know about it so they would enter to make their original project. So the Wild West was just to make the site a little more interesting.
All right, so let's see your #1 winner. This is what some creative web designer came up with to get the most links to the site in 3 weeks. And here it is. And remembering that this is a family show, the winning site was called Forget Me Not Panties. Tell us what we're looking at.
So what this site was created by a group that calls themselves the Panty Raiders, and they created a site that looks like a nice corporate site where you can buy a product, and the product is a pair of underwear that has a GPS device and biometric temperature sensor in it. And they say this is a great product for men who are worried their wives are cheating on them, or for fathers whose daughters are hitting puberty and they want to make sure they're not over at a guy's house, because it can tell you exactly where they are and their pulse and whether they're getting excited or not.
So let's focus in here on, you see viewers, the yellow concentric rings around a spot on the panty. That's the GPS device?
Right. So in one thing that's interesting about these kinds of projects is that it's a lot easier to make a website than to design special GPS panties. But a lot of people see that and it gets the idea across of, oh, I understand that why it's kind of interesting that a product like this could exist, and gets some people upset and gets people arguing. And so they didn't actually make these panties, but they made a website that was convincing enough and polished enough that people passed it around and emailed it to their friends and IM'd it to their friends, blogged about it, because they were kind of outraged or excited about it.
Tracking your wife or daughter's whereabouts, pair of panties, obviously set off this discussion and got a lot of links. So, but does it mean that even the the elite creative technorati who would have been interested in finding things to link to, that their minds are a little bit in the gutter?
Well, some people thought it was funny and linked to it. The other thing that was kind of surprising about this project is that it was huge in Japan, and that gave them this big push to probably the push they needed for victory. It got over 125,000 visitors from Excite Japan, which is a search engine in Japan. And one of the things about doing these kinds of projects is you never know who your audience is. You know, a television show, a radio show, you sort of build up an audience, the same types of people listen. With these things, you make it, and then all of a sudden it might be a totally different group that's listening to it than you expected.
Let's look at your runner-up winner here. And this was a site called Crying While Eating. And actually, before we play these two clips, and I should say that they're both funny in a weird way and disturbing, do you want to set up Crying While Eating?
Crying While Eating, in a way, it's a bizarre kind of project, but it's like a lot of other bizarre things on the web. It kind of makes sense, and you know exactly what it is, but it's a little perplexing and funny, and you're not sure exactly what it is.
So let's see one example of Crying While Eating. I just heard our cameraman here, our director, laughing, and I had the same reaction. When I first started looking at it, I thought, this is unbearably sad. I can't even watch it. And within 10 seconds, I was laughing.
Right. So if you go to the site, you'll see video after video of different people, and it'll say, why are they crying? What are they eating?
Right. Now, what we couldn't see there is that for each one, you are told before you roll the video
Right.
what they are eating and why they are crying.
Right.
So what was it in that case?
I'm not sure what it was in that case. There's a lot of them, but some of them are like crying because I'm good at lots of things, but not great at anything. Is the reason for crying. And then they're eating macaroni and cheese.
Oh,
and,
you know what it was on this? It was she was eating some kind of ice cream, and she was crying because she couldn't conform to women's fashion standards.
Oh, all right.
Right. So already they've got you laughing if you've read that before you see crying while eating. Let's see one more example of crying while eating. Okay, so that ended kind of gross, but he was eating moldy cheese and crying about being surrounded by rats. So this is an attractive thing. This is what people link to more than anything else except forget-me-not panties.
The contest was entirely performance-based. So, you might look, we had all these sites before the contest launched, and we had a panel of experts try to predict which ones would do the best. And it's hard to predict, and what you like might not be what everyone likes, but it was entirely performance-based. So the ones that won were the ones that reached the most people, and both Forget-Me-Not Panties and Crying While Eating reached hundreds of thousands of people without any promotion, any marketing, just people passing them around.
Right, and this is what they call the viral nature of how information spreads on the web. So why did you do this? I mean, is it, you as an artist, are you interested in selling this to marketers? What do you really learn from this? What do our viewers learn from this?
Actually, one of my intellectual heroes was a professor at the CUNY Graduate School named Stanley Milgram, who discovered this concept of 6 degrees of separation. And the idea was that we are all connected to each other through a few short jumps between friends and personal connections. And now that the internet is around, Stanley Milgram died before the internet was showed its potential for connecting people. But now that the internet's around, the fact that we're connected by 6 degrees of separation really matters, because I can tell my friends, and they can forward it onto their friends, and they can forward it onto their friends, and you really can reach millions of people just starting from one person.
So can you use this for good?
You can use it to win elections. You can use it to promote political causes. You can use it to raise tons of money for the tsunami. Everyone was forwarding around, relief efforts. You can use it to send around silly jokes and for entertainment. You can use it to market Burger King chicken sandwiches, like the Subservient Chicken ad. So it's a whole new way of distributing media, and the contest really was a few fun projects that show the way this works as a phenomenon.
I should mention that Jonah Peretti, Research and Development Director for I-Beam, will be part of an event tomorrow night at the I-Beam space on 19th Street in Chelsea. And this 21st Street, forgive me. I knew it was one block away from 20th Street. This is about eavesdropping, this other one.
So I-Beam looks at the way technologies are affecting cultural change, and we're doing a panel called Eavesdrop, where we have a private eye who knows how to do investigations. We have a hacker who knows how to eavesdrop on corporate communications. We have a artist who incorporates eavesdropping into art projects that she does. And we're bringing all these people together to talk about eavesdropping and how to listen in on things.
Jonah Peretti, thanks a lot. And now you know how to get people to link to your website, Crying While Eating or Forget-Me-Not Panties. Up next, the Downing Street Memos, Smoke and Mirrors, or an Iraq War Smoking Gun. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Once you see the world through math and science, you'll never never see anything the same way again. Go to girlsgotech.org.
You'll see.
When it comes to continuing education, all stops lead to CUNY. More than 200,000 New Yorkers of all ages in all 5 boroughs are enrolled in CUNY adult education courses. If you're looking for new job skills to enhance your career, start a new career, or if you want to enjoy a class in the arts, sciences, and humanities, then get on the train and come to one of CUNY's 19 campuses. CUNY continuing and professional education programs offer you more opportunities than any other learning institution in New York City. CUNY gives you high-quality instruction at low cost with schedules to meet your busy lifestyle. For more information, call 1-866-344-CUNY or log on to www.cuny.edu/continuinged. Hurry up, don't miss your stop, come to CUNY.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We are here live every Wednesday night during the month of June at 7 o'clock. We'll talk now about the Downing Street memos. These are 2 British government memos from the summer of 2002 that recently came to light. Some think they show proof that the U.S. government was bent on war, not just disarming Saddam Hussein as they claimed, also that the Brits were not at all sure the war the U.S. wanted would even be legal, and that the U.S. had no plan for post-Saddam Iraq. But others say the memos show nothing new and nothing damning. Let's put up on the screen a few of the interesting quotes from the Downing Street memos. Then we'll get 2 views on them from 2 guests in our studio. Quote number 1. Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action justified by the conjunction of terrorism and WMD. But the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy. Now, this is probably the richest quote. It could be interpreted that Bush tried to use terrorism and WMDs to justify the war rather than the real reasons for it. And there's a lot of debate over what those last words mean, that intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy. Was the intelligence being fixed like a horse race would be fixed? That's the question. 2. The NSC, National Security Council, had no patience with the UN route and no enthusiasm for publishing material on the Iraqi regime's record. There was little discussion in Washington of the aftermath after military action. So this indicates a lack of early post-war planning, and we see the so-called post-war period has been a problem. Number 3, no decisions had been taken, but he thought the most likely timing in U.S. minds for military action to begin was January, with the timeline beginning 30 days before the U.S. congressional elections. Now, this implies that the timing of the run-up to war might be used for political purposes in a campaign. 4, it is just possible that an ultimatum could be cast in terms which Saddam would reject because he is unwilling to accept unfettered access, and which would not be regarded as unreasonable by the international community. However, failing that, or an Iraqi attack, we would be most unlikely to achieve a legal basis for military action by January 2003. Now, this quote suggests 2 things. 1, that they considered crafting a resolution to be rejected so they would have an excuse for war, and 2, that the Brits questioned, much more than the U.S., whether war against Iraq would even be legal. 5, in practice, much of the international community would find it difficult to stand in the way of the determined course of the U.S. hegemon. However, the greater the international support, the greater the prospects of success. And this refers to U.S. as a hegemon, which means it's so powerful it doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks, usually a derogatory term. Interesting that it's there. So what does this all mean? Well, here is a clip of the reporter who broke the story, Michael Smith of the Sunday Times of London on MSNBC, describing the meeting that the Downing Street memo was about.
Those people that were attending that meeting as the equivalent of the National Security Council. So you've got the equivalent, Blair obviously being the equivalent of President Bush. You also have the British equivalent of Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Myers. All those people are there, and they're all making decisions, and they're all saying, well, this is what's going on, and they're all expressing concern over the situation in America. That is pretty much certain that we're going to go to war. They seem determined to go to war. The head of MI6, who's just returned from Washington, where he's, of course, had talks with George Tenet, the CIA director, says that the intelligence and facts are being fixed around the policy.
And here's a little more of Michael Smith on MSNBC reacting to a question about whether this addressed how to sell the war to the American people.
Yeah, and not just how to sell it to the British and American people, but also, of course, how to make it legal. Because for the British, it was very important that it became legal. And you see a discussion there about how we make it legal. And Jack Straw talks about getting an UN ultimatum, not as both Mr. Bush and Mr. Blair have repeatedly said, and indeed said back in their meeting the other day, in the press briefing in Washington, in order to try to avert war, but actually to try to get an excuse for war.
Well, the Downing Street memos are now getting some media attention in the U.S. Here is Cindy Sheehan, mother of a U.S. soldier killed in Iraq, speaking in Washington last week, as played on ABC.
The so-called Downing Street memo dated 23 July 2002 only confirms what I already suspected. The leadership of this country rushed us into an illegal invasion of another sovereign country on prefabricated and cherry-picked intelligence.
And here is Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice reacting to Cindy Sheehan on ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos on Sunday.
The United States of America and its coalition decided that it was finally time to deal with the threat of Saddam Hussein. There had been multiple resolutions against Saddam Hussein and his activities, everything from concerns about his weapons of mass destruction programs and his continued unwillingness to answer the legitimate questions of the international system about those programs, his having used weapons of mass destruction in the past, everything concerning the way that he treated his own people. After all, we found more than 300,000 people in mass graves.
Joining me now to discuss the Downing Street memos are Joe Conason, columnist at Salon.com, and Joel Mowbray, syndicated columnist. Welcome both of you to Brian Lehrer Live. Thank you. Joe, you're here as the liberal. Joel, you're here as the conservative. Joel, you're going to get the first question. Did Condi Rice not, in that cut, admit the main implication of this memo, which is that the U.S. had made the decision to go to war, and so the whole UN process was a sham?
Well, I think what I take out of it is that they knew from the beginning that it was pretty obvious that the United Nations really had no stomach for standing up to Iraq. And we learned later on, of course, because of the oil for food scandal, that part of that was motivated by impure reasons, both in terms of Russia and China and others. And so I think what look, back in the summer of 2002, I don't know how Joe feels about this, but I had a pretty good sense we were going to war. I didn't really feel like there was going to be much of a chance we weren't going to go to war. Sure, we were going to go through the UN, we were going to play through the motions. You know, Bush did go to the UN, Colin Powell went there. But I think the decision really was, look, we're going to do what we need to do. Let's hope we can get the UN on board.
But then how should the American people feel about what even you're describing as, in effect, a sham process involving the UN Security Council, and a sham process involving the UN weapons inspectors, who, after all, the Bush administration did not allow to finish their work?
Well, actually, Brian, it's very interesting. One of the things, we talk a lot about David Kaye's findings in the eventual results of the Iraqi survey.
Eventually, no weapons of mass destruction found.
Right. But one of the more interesting findings was that he believed that the weapons inspectors, with good evidence, were led around by the nose by Saddam, that they were duped, that they went to certain locations, items were cleared out, that he might not have had weapons. He didn't believe there was a stockpile, but he did believe there were ongoing programs and that evidence that they had to hide from inspectors. So the inspectors were there, and they were not getting anything done.
Well,
so the idea that we needed to finish...
Sorry, there's videotape of the inspectors destroying illegal missile
No, we know that
casings
they
and things
found
like
things,
that.
right? But a
So
lot of the other evidence was found.
They were
one
finding
at a
weapons.
time. Now you're talking about back in the 90s, right?
No, I'm talking about
those last
in
Right,
January
right.
2003.
Right.
The inspectors found what were deemed to be illegal missile parts,
And they had,
because they were too big, and they seized them and they destroyed them, and they showed it on TV. And in fact, Brian, if you think about what was really going on there, Saddam Hussein had been forced by the president's military mobilization, which really was a good thing up to the point where we decided to invade when we didn't have to. I supported the military mobilization to force the Iraqi regime to allow the inspectors back in. And I think it was good that the British government got the United States to go to the UN when it really didn't want to do that. The problem is that the president misrepresented to us and to the world what his intentions were.
But look where we are here.
There are other problems in the memos as well.
We're debating, we're having the old debate, the same debate that we might have sat around the table and had in 2003. And
except that now we have new evidence.
Right.
Oh,
but people say that the reason the good old MSM, mainstream media, is ignoring, for the most part, the Downing Street memos, is that there's nothing really new here.
Well,
everybody knows they were determined to go to war. Connie Rice says they were determined to go to war. What is new?
You're a newsman, and you know the difference between gossip or third-hand information from unnamed sources and a government document, a classified document from the British government that the Downing Street memo, a lot of people in England call it the Downing Street minutes because it's the minutes of a security cabinet meeting. The people we're talking about who are being quoted in this document are not, some nameless person. It's the foreign minister of Great Britain, Jack Straw. It's the head of MI6, the Foreign Intelligence Agency, at that time, Sir Richard Dearlove.
So what did they say that you didn't already know?
Well, what they said was that the president had told them that he intended to go to war. The president and his advisors had told them that the intelligence was being fixed around the policy, which is what Michael Smith said. And by the way, Michael Smith told you on the air the other day that there was no question about what fixed meant. At least I believe he did. I think it was your program.
We can get a good, robust debate going.
Well, but
do you think
fixed
means the intelligence was being fixed like a horse race?
Well, because you have to read the whole sentence. It says, but the intelligence. And why does it begin with the word but? The reason it says, but the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy was a way of saying, hey, there really isn't the justification for this. And then Jack Straw, a few paragraphs later, says the same thing. He says, the justification for war is thin. The reason the justification for war is thin is because the WMDs that they suspected were in Iraq or might be in Iraq were much less than what they knew were possessed by Libya and Iran.
Keyword, but?
But, Brian, I will say that when you take a look at that sentence, it isn't at all a reporting of what the U.S. said to them that, oh, well, we're fixing the intelligence and the facts around the, to have our political justification fit in it. That was their interpretation of the strength of the evidence presented by the U.S. A whole different animal than what you were just saying.
It's the report. It's actually the report of the intelligence director from his. Okay.
Joe Mowbray, go ahead.
And what you have here is, I think, the really newsworthy story here, Brian, is that Tony Blair actually had more dissent in his inner circle than we realized, and that this was him driving the ship personally, not some advisor pulling his ear and steering him towards the U.S. position. I think he was firmly convinced, and by the way, I don't think Tony Blair was led around by the nose by anybody. He had all the same intelligence, all the same evidence that everyone else had. He made a different conclusion. And by the way, reasonable people could disagree on the Iraq question. I don't think the Downing Street memo, beyond the political story there, tells anything new.
We have our phone number up on your screen. We hope to have some time for a few phone calls on the Downing Street memos. Is this something you've been following? Call us with your interpretation or your questions, 212-251-0801. You see it on your screen there. I want to get to the question of legality of this war, which is something we've debated almost zero in this country, but apparently was much on the minds of these high British government officials. Joel, and I'm going to read a whole other segment from the Downing Street memo than what we put on the screen. Bear with me, viewers. It says, U.S. views of international law vary from that of the UK and the international community. Regime change per se is not a proper basis for military action under international law, but regime change could result from action that is otherwise lawful. We would regard the use of force against Iraq or any other state as lawful if exercised in the right of individual or collective self-defense, if carried out to avert an overwhelming humanitarian catastrophe or authorized by the UN Security Council. So, hand-wringing in Britain that we never probably had here within the government over the legality of the war. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that Britain, because of its history, probably takes takes with greater salt the idea of the legitimacy of international law. I think here in the United States, both politically and in our history, we don't take the same view of international law that the UK does, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And by the way, speaking of whether or not the question of war was legal, you can have 2 lawyers and 3 opinions. If I'm a lawyer. Not that I say that proudly, but you can have differing views on this.
Do you think that they satisfied any of those 3, that it was either self-defense, carried out to an overwhelming humanitarian catastrophe, or authorized, obviously not authorized by the UN Security Council, but at that point in time, the memo says that none of those conditions applied?
We've had exactly 1 war sanctioned and carried out by the United Nations, and that was the first Iraq War. If we sat around waiting for the UN to lead us into war, even to avert international human catastrophes, look at Rwanda. No, by the way, I don't think I don't accept the premise of the question that there are only 3 bases. No, I don't accept the premise that there are only 3 bases for going to war.
But
from the British perspective,
don't pretend that it was justified.
Go ahead.
Look. Traditionally, actually, American governments have had great respect for international law for very good reasons, is that they serve our interests as well as the interests of the rest of the world. This government has decided that it does not. And the reason that our government went to the United Nations and at least tried to put a cover or a color of international law into its actions was because of Colin Powell, primarily, who understands better, perhaps, than some of the other people in the administration, why it's important to at least act as if you believe in international law. International law really serves the interests of the United States in many, many ways. Everything from our ability to mail a letter abroad to, whether our ships are safe on the seas, and many, many other things. And for people to sort of cavalierly say, oh, we don't really believe in international law, it's just asinine. Secondly, it's clear that there was no justification for this war under international law, which is why the Brits were so worried about it. Tony Blair did this because he was concerned about preserving the relationship between Britain and the United States as a way of preserving Britain's power. His cabinet didn't agree.
Somehow Blair came to a conclusion that the war would be legal in British eyes.
I don't know that he came to that conclusion. I think he came to the conclusion that he could get away with it whether it was legal or not, because of the U.S. hegemon, as it was put in the other memo.
Let's take a phone call. Josh on Staten Island.
Yes.
You're on Brian Lehrer Live. Hi.
Yes, well, I think that the war was completely illegal. We were misled. And not only that, once we went in, the execution of the war is the stupidest, most ineffective war the United States ever fought.
And thank you for your call. And Joel Mowbray, the memo, even as early as 2002, seemed to indicate that they didn't have a plan for the post-war, and we've seen how problematic the post-war has been.
Well, absolutely, the post-war has been problematic. I think that part of the problem is you had dissension within the administration, that the president never really worked out as far as which approach to take for after the war, and I think that is a genuine fault of the war planning. And by the way, the people they were dealing with were at the NSC, which is dominated by the State Department, careerists who hold about 2/3 of the substantive positions at the NSC. So all this talk about how the State Department had everything planned out, they knew what they were doing, the NSC was on board. Well, the British certainly didn't think so. And by the way, just getting back to the question of international law, the reason why I don't accept the premise of those 3 being the only bases for going to war is that there was already a Security Council resolution that Iraq had to submit to weapons inspections and to completely de-weaponize, and they kicked out weapons inspectors in 1998. So they had already violated the terms of surrender of the previous war, which gives us more than enough justification under international law to go back into Iraq.
If you accept the premise that you are acting on the basis of the UN Security Council resolution, then you might accept the premise that you need another resolution in order to have a casus belli and go to war.
But
in other words, and we went to the UN saying that was what we wanted.
Right.
And he let the inspectors back in, although the president has a couple of times said he didn't let the inspectors back in. I mean, some of the most amazing video footage you'll ever see is the president of the United States saying that something that everybody in the world saw didn't happen.
I'm curious, just to get your take real quick on the word hegemon.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Hegemon is Leviathan. It's the giant. It's the huge, overarching state before which all must kneel.
So are we surprised to see that in a British government document referring to the United States?
Favorite British word. I mean, of course, you know, and of course, there's as you suggest, there's an undertone of bitterness to that, which is, you know, Britain used to be the hegemon one fine day long ago, but not anymore.
But President Bush would say, no, we're not a hegemon. We're, you know, a country among other countries, certainly a leader among other countries. Is it derogatory? Do you shrink from hegemon?
I don't think so at all. I mean, maybe that connotation, sure, I would shrink from a little bit. But I don't think actually that the Bush administration plays down the fact that they are the dominant power. One of the arguments that was made before the Iraq War, especially by people on the right, was, look, we are the world's lone superpower, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have a better moral compass than Europe. We have a better moral compass than most of the rest of the world, and let's not be afraid to go with that.
I don't know about that.
Stacy in Manhattan, you're on Brian Lehrer Live. Hello.
Yeah. Because someone says to say, I agree with, you know, with a lot of the people who've called in. The one thing I'm more concerned about is that how the administration has been very, very effective in distracting attention from issues that matter with the war, like they've had the issue with Martha Stewart, just things in the media
Right. Okay. Let me take that as enough of a setup and ask Joe Conason, what do you make of the media reaction to the Downing Street memos? Certainly, one of the articles of faith of people who think the memos are important is that the media in this country has not treated them like they're important.
Well, I probably wrote the first column complaining about the media's failure to write about this or cover it. The memo was exposed in the British press on May 1st in the Times of London, a conservative newspaper, by the way.
Rupert Murdoch newspaper, isn't
Rupert Murdoch newspaper, yes. But what the British call a quality paper. And I wrote about it on May 5th saying, I can't believe that this isn't being covered. So I was puzzled by our media's reaction. A month later, when they still were sort of not paying very close attention to it, I still wondered. And you know, it's funny, they ask questions like, is it authentic? You know, why did so-and-so say this?
We're almost out of time.
Yeah.
Why do you think the mainstream media has paid so little attention?
I'm puzzled by it. I think it's a huge story and they should be covering it.
Joel Mowbray, same thing.
I think, again, I go back to the one newsworthy tidbit I take out of it, which is that it shows much more dissension in the inner ranks, the inner circle of Tony Blair than we previously knew, which is a fascinating political question, but frankly one that's more local and germane to Britons than it is to Americans.
Joe Conason, Joel Mowbray, thank you for joining us on Brian Lehrer Live.
Thank you.
Will this be the last you hear about the Downing Street memo? I don't know. But that's it for tonight's Brian Lehrer Live. We want to know what you think about this show. Email your polite comments, your angry rants, and your useful suggestions to brian@cuny.tv, not .com, not .org, brian@cuny.tv. We've got one more show in our Wednesday night series for this spring and summer. Next Wednesday night at 7, we will take stock of where the mayoral race stands. And remember to check out my daily radio show, weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC, New York Public Radio. Tomorrow morning, we'll preview Billy Graham's return to New York this weekend in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park. That's at 10 a.m. on WNYC at FM 93.9 and AM 820. Have a great night.